Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching my channel. Today we'll be covering The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening for the Nintendo Switch. This is a remake of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening for the Nintendo Game Boy, which, over looking back throughout the years, I think the Game Boy might have been my favorite console just because I took it everywhere with me. I could play it at night. I made it like a little fort under my bed, so I was really immersed playing these games. And so to have a Zelda experience on one of my favorite consoles of all time was a pretty big deal. I actually didn't really care much about it when it first came out because I don't know, I wasn't really into it. I think I had a Sega Genesis at the time. I was thinking about getting a Sega Genesis. I believe this game came out around 93, 94-ish. This particular game came out in 2019, the remake. I'm talking about the original right now. And I was so stoked when they announced that they were remaking this for the Switch. So this game's pretty much almost exactly like the original, except for the graphical change, which I have mixed feelings about. Also, the music is redone. Pretty much everything's redone, but there's pros and cons of it. One of the pros right off the bat is I love the anime recreation of the scene that you first saw. That was originally done in 8-bit, and it looked really, really good. There was also a Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening re-release for the Game Boy Color and regular Game Boy, and if you had a Game Boy Color, you could access a dungeon that was exclusive to the Game Boy Color, and it actually had color related puzzles that you couldn't solve with a normal Game Boy, so that was kind of cool. So not many people that I hear talk about this game being their favorite Legend of Zelda game. I think it's kind of quirky that this is mine. I think it has to do with memories and nostalgia versus one game being better than the other. Because if you ask the average person, I'm sure they would say Breath of the Wild, Ocarina of Time, the original game. And then A Link to the Past, of course. And a lot of my favorites are Wind Waker, this game, but the Game Boy version. But I like this game a lot. But the Game Boy version just tops it out. The sprite style is just more nostalgic to me. There's kind of hints of it on the carpet. When you saw that little flower on the carpet, that's actually how they used to draw flowers on the Game Boy. It would be 4 pixels within a slightly darker pixel in the middle, like a cross, and the middle pixel would be a different color, and that's how they pulled off flowers. So it's quirky because it doesn't take place in Hyrule. The music's a little bit different. It's kind of weird. You'll see characters from other Nintendo franchises, and when I saw a documentary of this, it was actually an experimental game, and that's one of the reasons why it's so weird. But my experience with Zelda before this was the original Zelda, and then the Legend of Zelda 2. What was that called? Link's Adventure, which actually I believe had a pretty darn good, cool story. That was the 2D one. I wish they'd remake that game. I apologize if my voice is coarse. I've been extremely tired and busy, but I felt bad about not putting videos on my channel, and I just want to put stuff out there. So I hope that you understand and bear with me, because I really want to share this game with you, because what a great time to play it. You don't have to download a Game Boy emulator. I believe that the original version of this on Game Boy is on Nintendo's online service. They just released a Game Boy one. They have so many tiers now. I don't even know how it fucking works. But anyway, I'm just kind of trying to show you the town. It's quirky. We got a little claw machine. I couldn't remember quite how it worked. I didn't know if you needed to push the button once to make it go forward or hold it. So you can see me struggle. But yeah, I just like this game so much, but I really miss the pixel art. I was hoping with this game they would try to somehow keep the style of how the anime looked, the beginning anime scene looked, and somehow incorporate it into the game, but they tried to stylize the pixelized look, and they kind of remind me of, I don't know what else to call them if this is not the correct thing, please correct me, this is purely out of ignorance, but like a Russian nesting doll, like those dolls that like have like a bunch of smaller versions inside of each one. They kind of remind me of that style. They almost look like all the characters look like they're either made out of plastic or wood. It almost has a claymation look. I like it, but it doesn't look like the Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening that I remember, but it looks really cool. Like, I just remember on Game Boy the trees looking very stylized, and they try to capture that look, but the original game was completely top down, where this is more isometric and slightly tilted, so some of those effects, like the way you saw the trees like layered, like you can kind of see it at an angle in this game, and they look more like trees than that very specific tree look that the 2D Zeldas have. You also can see it in A Link to the Past. This video has a lot of edits in it because I wanted to show you a lot of aspects of the game without spoiling too much. There's a lot of me wandering around and trying to figure out stuff, so I tried to cut out the fat so I could talk about the game. But as you can see, Yoshi is not like a character in the Zelda franchise. Isn't this like my luck? This is exactly what would happen to me if like I would actually try to do this in real life. Truthfully, after a while I was actually pretty good at the claw machine. I remember like at the grocery store I would be winning stuff, but it was like crappy shit. It's not like now where people like know how to play the game to win iPhones and shit. It was like stuffed animals, like the cheapest disposable camera you could ever get and stuff like that, and people would see that I would get stuff and then they point the stuff in the machine and then I'd try to get it, and then I'd feel really bad if I fucked it up because I felt like I wasted their money. I love the aspect of like the songs and the instruments and stuff like that to wake up. I believe it's the Windfish. I can't remember offhand because I'm on the spot, but yeah, I kind of stayed here and listened to it because even though it sounds like silly music maybe to the uninitiated that doesn't have nostalgia for the older games, this was very much an aspect of the game, and it was like in chiptune form. It didn't really sound like vocalization, so like even though I hadn't heard the song in a while, I was just sitting there and I'm like, yeah, I know this, and then I was thinking about how the rest of the song went, and it went exactly. It's so crazy how your brain like stores so much stuff and you don't even realize it until something reminds you of it, and I just absolutely adore it. So this area Zelda, it's completely different. You see you have like I think they're called like a Bow Wow. That's also from the Super Mario world. I believe their first appearance was in Super Mario Brothers 3. I could be wrong. So basically, this game chronologically, I believe, takes place after Legend of Zelda Part 2. Possibly 1, but I think it's after Part 2, and then Link goes off and travels. In a way, I feel like, even though they're not really related, I almost feel, or are they? I haven't looked at the timeline in a long time. I almost feel like Wind Waker kind of fits this theme, because Wind Waker was a little bit original, and that's another one of my favorite ones. I do like all the Zelda games. The only one I struggle with, ironically, is Breath of the Wild, just because it's so radically different than the Zelda games that I'm used to. I love how every time these kids end something, it's like, I guess that's what it means, I'm just a kid or whatever. They always end it with some sort of statement like that they're ignorant because they're young or whatever. I kind of appreciate that. I love this library. That book standing there, hint hint, out of the ordinary. Maybe you can use that for later. I won't tell you anything more, but yeah, you have a library. It kind of explains the world to you a little bit, but there is major puzzle solving. It might look like the game's just holding your hand, but I'm also cutting everything closer together so this video moves a little bit faster, because there's only so much I can say. Like when you're saying the same stuff over and over again without actually like interacting and having long pauses. I actually want this video to be filled with information nonstop, because I don't consider this a let's play video, because that's more like a stream. So you have your stereotypical like I forgot what those things are called, those octopus enemies. You think I would know, like I have the Zelda encyclopedia. I used to read it all the time as a kid, but some stuff sticks with me, and some stuff doesn't. I might be able to classify ghosts and Ghostbusters, but I can't tell you like what like some of these enemies are called, which is fine because like it's still familiar to me. My history with Zelda is basically when my dad was a repair technician and was contracted by Nintendo. I love this owl, by the way. Every time the owl showed up and went hoo hoo like that, I'm sorry, again, my voice is a little cracky, so I can't really do silly voices, but my dog would wake up and get excited to see the owl. Like, she usually doesn't care what's on the screen with games, but I don't know, this one seemed to interest her a little bit, maybe the way the characters look or move, I don't know. But I love the beach setting, I love the tropical setting, and I love that there's, like, it's a very varied setting, and it's not a terribly large Zelda game, but my history with the Zelda games was where when my dad was a technician, he'd just bring stacks of refurbished games home, and essentially, he'd be like, hey, you want to play these games? But I was essentially, like, testing them, and the Legend of Zelda happened to be in the stack, maybe with part 2 as well. I think I had the Nintendo's Ultimate Player's Guide. I think I have pieces of it somewhere because I took that book everywhere and basically deteriorated over time just from being exposed to air like non-stop and UV light because I always had it with me and always read it. Like even like the portion I have now, like a dumbass, my kid self like duct taped it together, but I was super young, like maybe like 6 or 7. When I got my NES, and shortly after we got the Legend of Zelda after Christmas, I just remember us playing all those games, and we got the Legend of Zelda. I played through it, I was like, wow, this game is really cool, but I didn't really understand different types of games. Sorry for the sirens, I live right near a fire station. Unfortunately, I don't have a sound studio. I closed the door just to get rid of the animal walking sounds, and then a fucking fire truck comes. That's my luck, but you know, it'll add charm to this video. So I like how this game incorporates your shield a little bit more, so it's a little bit interactive. Like I said, the octopus like enemies look a little different. Everything looks like it's made out of like wood or vinyl. In ways where I said it looks like wood, it also reminds me of, I don't know if you ever remember those little vinyl California raisin figurines. Like they weren't like posable or anything. They were already in a pose, and they were only like the size of maybe like 2 segments of a knuckle, like not very tall. Like I don't want to say measurement units, and you're like, I go by imperial or whatever. So I guess everybody can relate to a hand. There's going to be one person typing without hands. I know it. That's my luck. But yeah, all these areas are really well represented because of this graphical style. And this game has been out since 2019. It does suffer from slowdown that wasn't in the original game. It also has load times that weren't in the original game. But the art style works. It's functional. It feels the same. One gripe is I can't use the D-pad to move around. I kind of feel like that's blasphemous considering the way the original game controlled. But, you know, you win some, you lose some. But I wish that was an option. Maybe they could have patched it in later, but it doesn't seem like after all these years this remake has changed all that much. But it's a pretty excellent game, and in my opinion at least. And if you want a shorter and unique Zelda experience that isn't too cryptic, I would suggest this game. And if you ever get stuck and you think it's impossible, we live in the day and age of the internet. There's a million guides for this game, and this game is so close to the Game Boy game. You could literally use a Game Boy guide and still get through this game because the layout's pretty much the same. There are things where you actually can construct your own dungeon and share them. I don't know if that service is still active. I don't have Nintendo's online service, so I never used it. I don't have like a lot of friends that have Switch, so my Switch collection is somewhat small compared to my PS4 collection because I curate them a little bit more carefully. Also, Switch games don't tend to go on sale that much, so it really has to be a game that I really want. yeah, I don't know why Nintendo never, I guess because they get away with it. I mean, I don't know why. They want money, they can get money, and they can get away with it. Like, that heart was teasing me for a second. I was trying to figure it out, but I think I need something else. I won't say what. So that's why I walked away, and I truncated this little section going to the witch and stuff like that. So you just kind of have an understanding. And I really love how these little huts and everything are like elaborately decorated, and that's something that actually came over from the Game Boy version. The Game Boy version just had so much damn charm. I first saw the Game Boy version, of course, on a commercial, and I was like, oh yeah, that looks kind of cool. But part of me kind of wanted Zelda to be a side scroller. I don't know why. I didn't really progress that far in a Legend of Zelda 2 Link's Adventure, but I did like the idea of having an overhead world and it being 2D, and I'm surprised they've never revisited that or tried to like maybe refine it or something. I hope one day Nintendo thinks about that, but I know with Breath of the Wild and stuff like that, it's going strong. I hope they eventually re-release the HD remakes of Wind Waker, which is one of my favorite Zelda games, and Twilight Princess, which is another great one, although there's a lot of segments where you might not necessarily play in the form you think, and I feel like they're longer than they should be, and that's the only thing that hurts that game, but that's a different day. I have it for the GameCube, but my dog in her infinite wisdom like took my Wii and my Wii console not the Wii console, and unfortunately when she was a puppy, it was like put away, and she found it and she chewed up the AC adapter. Luckily it wasn't plugged in or hooked up or anything, but I need to replace that. But Wii's are so abundant, or Wii consoles are. I feel like I need to be specific for that for some reason. I just feel like everything I say on the internet's gonna be misinterpreted. But anyway, I don't like playing on the Wii that much because of the sensor bar and everything like that. And I just don't like motion control so often. I avoid recording the Wii. That's why you haven't seen too many Wii videos over time, but it's one of the few ways you can play a GameCube game cheaply with component cable. So I would like to revisit those games. Switch did get a remake of Skyward Sword, but hopefully I can share Switch versions of all these things eventually. But those are two games released on the Wii U that haven't come to the Switch. Hopefully when the Switch gets older and Nintendo's desperate to make money, they'll re-release those, and I'd be happy to repurchase them and play them at like a better resolution and frame rate and stuff like that. So this dungeon is fairly easy, but let me get to my history with this game. I'm always backtracking and talking over myself, but I guess that's part of this channel's charm. So I saw this on commercials. I remember going to Toys R Us. If you're not familiar with that, that's just like was a toy store. I think Canada still has them, and maybe they've opened up little areas in the US, but they're like more like kiosks versus like a whole full-fledged store. But it used to just be a gigantic toy store, and like a huge portion of that store before they had GameStop and stuff like that used to be video game related. You would go to Toys R Us usually for your video games. They'd have like Babbage's or software, etc. at the mall, but usually everything at the mall is more expensive. There's way more people there, and why have an aneurysm when you can just go to the toy store, get the ticket and whatever. But they used to have like this little thing that was hardwired to like an actual Game Boy unit, and it would show the screen. This was before the Super Game Boy, and I remember seeing the graphics, and that's the first time I started to pay attention. I was like, oh wow, this looks closer to the Super Nintendo version, which was really impressive because the Game Boy is only 8-bit. I figured it would just look like the original Zelda, which I really liked. When we play tested that game, I realized my dad was playing it a lot more afterwards, and then like a few days later we randomly went to the store for some unknown reason, and it was the Pick Up Zelda. And I just remember as a kid seeing my dad get excited about a video game and buying it was the coolest thing ever. He got obsessed with it. He like had charts and maps and everything. Like, this is before the internet, so he's talking to friends. Like, he basically had like an Indiana Jones Grail diary for Zelda. And then one of my friends, or it could have possibly been me, but I feel like it's one of my friends. Back in the day, you'd have to hold the restart button and the power to turn the system off without corrupting your save, and somebody corrupted my dad's save and he swore off video games for the rest of his life. The only game I've really seen him get into after that, I saw him be a little bit interested when Doom came out. He played that a little bit when I had it, and then I remember for some reason he really liked the Super Game Boy, being able to play Tetris on the TV, which is weird. Why didn't we just get Tetris for like the Nintendo or something? Or I think they even had it for the Sega Genesis. Oh, I remember when we got the Sega Genesis, even though I love the X-Men, and at the time I loved the game, now going back, I don't enjoy the first game so much. I think the second X-Men game, the Clone Wars on the Genesis / Mega Drive, is really good, but the first one I got, I loved it to death because it was X-Men, but as an adult, it's very difficult for me to play. But I remember my dad being really impressed with that and playing that for a bit. Those are like the last few times I saw my dad being interested in a video game. That and Mortal Kombat too, because I guess all the controversy, I guess they were curious what kind of violence I'd be exposed to, and then I guess my dad liked violence too. And I remember the first time he saw like a fatality, it was like Baraka, like the guy with the knife like hands, and he like impaled that guy and he like slid down on the knife. And I remember my dad laughing, much like sometimes you see me do on YouTube when there's a lot of violence. I guess sometimes the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree. So after seeing it at Toys R Us, it was like a year or so, and one of my friends down the street got like a Game Boy. It was during the Play It Loud series where they started to release Game Boys, the OG ones, like the first one that you say black and white, but let's be honest, it was like green and gray. But I think this feather, the jumping feather, was first introduced in Link's Awakening, which is pretty cool. But I remember it was either his birthday or Christmas, just going there, and he's like, look what I have. And I got this one game, and I had a Game Boy, and I had quite a few games, but for some reason I didn't have that one. I just wasn't interested. Like, all I knew about Zelda was Zelda, like 1 and 2. I didn't have a Super Nintendo, so I didn't realize what I was missing out on. So we shared Game Boy games. Well, he shared his game, and then I opened up my case and I had a few because I had it a bit longer than I guess he did. I believe he got his in like 95 or 4, and I believe I got my Game Boy in 1992. So I had a bit of time to accumulate a little bit more games, so I had something to trade. So and he would let me make a save on his cartridge because you had multiple slots. I just remember going to his house and pretending to hang out and just play like Link's Awakening on my Game Boy and be like, just like listening to him. Like, I enjoyed hanging out with my friend and stuff like that, but I was just obsessed. I hadn't played a game quite like this in a long time, since the original Zelda. There weren't a whole lot of games like this on the Sega Genesis, and Nintendo had some games like this, but a lot of them were clones and just not done as well. And then eventually, like, I realized that I'm never gonna finish this game, and I want it, but I'm like not working and everything, so I like begged my parents. So I basically got like principals on-rolled over and over again. That means getting like straight A's, not even like 1B over and over again. I remember the first time, like, I was such an ungrateful little prick. My dad like got me like a decent Swiss Army knife made out of surgical steel, and I was disappointed because it wasn't the Legend of Zelda. And then the next time it was the Legend of Zelda, and the rest was history. And then when my friend and I had it, we kind of helped each other because, again, this was before the internet, so I'd get a little bit further than him, and he'd be like, how'd you get past that place? And I'd be like, oh, I just did this, that, and the other. And then I would get stuck, and I'd call him, and I'd be like, where are you? And he'd be a little bit further than me, and I was like, okay, don't tell me exactly how you did it, but kind of give me a hint. And then at the time, when I was deciding, because this was I think it might have been a little bit, no, it was after. So when I was deciding whether to get a Super Nintendo or a Sega Genesis, I didn't want to get like a bias magazine, or I tried not to. Even as a kid, I was aware of such things. It's like, you're not going to get like good praise about, they're not going to praise the Sega Genesis and Nintendo Power and what was the Sega magazine, Sega Ages or whatever. I don't fucking know. I never saw a Sega magazine here, to be honest with you. I just remember Nintendo Power, Electronic Gaming Monthly, and then they happen to have game players, and there's a magazine called Game Fan and video games, and Tips and Tricks was awesome. They actually had an index in the back where you could actually look up codes and stuff in alphabetical order. That was so helpful for like, because I would rank games and I'd flip through the back, and 9 times out of 10 there'd be codes, and back then you have to be a really good player to see the rest of the game, so a lot of times codes at least showed you what the rest of the game looked like, and maybe later you'd purchase it. A lot of times renting games back then actually helped you decide whether you wanted to purchase the game or not. At least that's how it worked for me. Like, it made me want to play the game more. Like, every Castlevania game, old school Castlevania game that I ever bought, I never owned first. I always had to rent it first because they were fairly expensive, and most of the time, I don't think I ever bought a new Castlevania game until Castlevania Symphony of the Night on the PlayStation. Oh, my parents got me Castlevania 2 for the Game Boy, which is another one of my favorite Game Boy games. But anyway, so yeah, me and my friend, we would always help each other out, and then I'd have like Nintendo, Sega game players, so they covered everything, even 3DO and stuff like that, so it was more than Nintendo and Sega, and I really liked it. And they had like a help section, and I remember like going through every little issue, trying to scramble every little bit of information I could about this game, because I was like running on fumes, like figuring it out. But it was so much fun. It was always so much rewarding. I always felt like $1,000,000 when I saw one of these dungeons, and the boss fights are really, really fun. And I don't know, it's definitely a Zelda game, but it has its own unique identity, and I love it so much for that. And most of it carried over with the Switch versions. Beside like my mild criticisms, I would be curious like what a version of this game would look like if they actually tried to capture how Link looked in the cutscene versus like trying to make the sprite work, that's the gameplay sprite work from the original, look more stylized. But you know, it's a choice and it works well. But a huge gripe is not being able to use the D-pad, because that's how I played the original game, and it throws me off trying to use an analog stick for a 2D Zelda game. But that's definitely personal preference, and I'm sure you'd have no problem with it if you grew up playing if you didn't grow up playing the original game. Sorry, I said that in reverse. But yeah, I just remember getting the flu and playing this game non-stop, and for some reason, that's when I realized how much I fell in love with it, because no matter how miserable I was, like, that game just made me happy, and that was one of my last old school memories with the game until they ended up announcing it again. For some reason, I missed out on the re-release, and then there were 2 sequels, Oracle Ages and Oracle Seasons, and they were cool games. They were for Game Boy Color, but they just weren't as good in my opinion. One was about time, and one was about seasons changing the level, and you had to combine the games to actually like see the full ending and get the last dungeon. I think it worked like that. But that was actually developed by Capcom. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in this game, That's awesome. I hope you check it out. This is one of my favorite Zelda games, and I'm happy to share it with you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're all doing fantastic, and I'll talk to you on the next video. Sorry for the delay in streams and videos. Like I said, things have been hectic. Hope that changes soon, but hopefully this will be a good enough video for now. Alright, thanks again. Talk to you later. Bye.
If you want to, like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.